The chandeliers in the Lagos banquet hall sparkled like diamonds, reflecting off the expensive champagne glasses. Nneka stood tall in her best suit, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythmic pride. This was the moment. For 18 months, she had breathed this merger, skipping meals and losing sleep to craft every sentence of the final contract. Beside her stood Chief Emeka, the man she had served with unwavering loyalty. As the cameras flashed, Chief stepped toward the microphone, his smile wide and practiced. Nneka leaned in, expecting the mention of her name, the public "thank you" he had promised. Instead, his voice turned as cold as a harmattan wind. "I must clarify one thing," Chief announced to the silent elite crowd. "This young woman beside me, she was only a simple assistant. She did the filing and the fetching." A gasp rippled through the room. Nneka felt the blood drain from her face. "In fact," Chief continued, his eyes hardening, "she nearly ruined this deal with her lack of understanding. Security, please escort her out. She does not belong at this high table." As heavy hands grabbed her arms, Nneka looked at the giant screen behind him. Her name had been scrubbed from the legal documents, replaced by a void. But to understand how she got here, we have to go back. The story of Nneka's journey did not begin in a hall of marble and glass, but by the slow-moving waters of the Ethiop River. She was the daughter of a widow who sold smoked fish to keep a roof over their heads. In their small village, Nneka was known as the girl who studied by the light of a kerosene lamp until the oil ran dry. Her mother, Mama Afani, always told her that a person's word was their bond. Loyalty is the only wealth a poor person truly owns, the old woman would say, her hands smelling of salt and wood smoke. Nneka carried these words like a lucky charm when she finally boarded the bus to the bright, chaotic lights of the city. She landed a job with Chief Emeka's struggling firm when it was nothing more than a two-room office with a leaking ceiling. On her first day, Chief looked her in the eye and made a solemn vow in front of the small staff. "Nneka, if you stand by me while we are on the floor, I promise you this. When I rise, you shall rise beside me." It was a promise that felt like a covenant, signed in the presence of the ancestors. She believed him completely. Life in the city was a harsh teacher, but Nneka was a diligent student. She worked twice as hard as any man in the office, often staying long after the streetlights flickered to life. There was a particular night 3 years ago that stayed burned into her memory. The company was on the brink of total collapse. Creditors had stormed the building, shouting and threatening to chain the doors. The electricity had been cut off because the bills hadn't been paid in months. Most of the other staff members, fearing for their futures, packed their bags and fled into the night. But Nneka stayed. She sat in the dark with Chief Emeka, who was weeping quietly at his desk. She didn't just offer words. She took action. She reached into her hidden purse and pulled out the money she had been saving for her mother's urgent eye surgery. It was every kobo she possessed. "Use this for the investor trip to Abuja," she whispered, pushing the envelope toward him. Chief looked at the money, then at her, his face twisted with a mixture of shame and relief. He never told the board where that money came from, and Nneka never asked for credit. She thought loyalty didn't need a receipt. The turning point for the company came during the high-stakes meeting with Mr. Sterling, a legendary international investor. Chief Emeka had spent the previous night celebrating a minor victory and arrived at the boardroom an hour late, his breath smelling of stale brandy and his notes in total disarray. The investors sat in stony silence, their faces expressing a deep impatience that signaled the end of the deal. Sensing the disaster, Nneka stepped forward. She didn't wait for permission. She began to pitch the project with a clarity and passion that silenced the room. She spoke of the African market not just as numbers, but as people, dreams, and potential. Mr. Sterling leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he watched the young woman command the room. He wasn't impressed by the company's glossy brochures or Chief's stuttering excuses. He was impressed by Nneka's undeniable integrity and her deep knowledge of the craft. When the meeting ended, Mr. Sterling ignored Chief and handed his card directly to Nneka. His legal team later sent an email addressed to her as the primary negotiator for the merger. NECA felt a surge of hope, but when Chief saw the email thread on her screen later that day, his expression didn't show pride. It showed a cold, flickering shadow of resentment. The seeds of betrayal are often planted in the soil of another man's success. A week after the successful pitch, Chief Emeka attended a private, elite dinner hosted by the city's most powerful tycoons. Among them was a rival CEO, a man with a tongue like a silver serpent, who leaned in close to Chief as they sipped expensive scotch. "Your assistant is becoming quite the star, Emeka," the rival whispered, his voice dripping with mock concern. "People are saying she is the real brain behind your empire. If she becomes too visible, you will become replaceable in the eyes of the board. An eagle cannot share its sky with a vulture that flies too high." Chief Emeka felt a sharp, burning sting of insecurity. He looked around the room and realized that everyone was looking at him differently now. They weren't seeing a visionary leader. They were seeing a man who relied on a village girl. That very night, instead of going home to sleep, Chief returned to his dark office. He sat at his computer, his face illuminated by the blue light, and began to draft a new plan. It was a plan to erase the woman who had saved him. He started by contacting the legal team in secret, bypassing NECA's extension for the first time in years. The following weeks were a masterclass in quiet deception. Chief Emeka worked late into the nights, but this time he ensured NECA was sent on pointless errands across the city. Using his administrative access, he opened the master files of the merger contract. With a few keystrokes, he began the process of digital murder. He navigated to the co-negotiator clause, the one that guaranteed NECA a seat on the new board and a significant share of the success fee. He highlighted her name and hit delete. In its place, he typed the name of his cousin, a man who had never spent a single hour in the office. To make the deception complete, Chief forged internal approval timestamps, making it appear as though these changes had been reviewed and signed off by the entire department months ago. He moved with the calculated precision of a thief in the night. Every time NECA asked for an update on the final draft, he would pat her hand patronizingly and say, "Don't worry your head about the technicalities, my dear. I am taking care of your future just as I promised." He smiled, but the smile no longer reached his eyes. The trap was set for the grand signing ceremony. The day of the public announcement arrived, and the atmosphere in the office was electric. NECA dressed with care, wearing a necklace her mother had sent from the village for good luck. She expected to be sitting at the head table, but when they arrived at the venue, she noticed Chief was acting strangely. He greeted everyone with boisterous laughter but avoided NECA's gaze entirely. When the presentation began, a large screen illuminated the room with the project summary. NECA's heart stopped. Every strategy she had written, every innovative graph she had designed, and every financial model she had sweated over was displayed. However, the credits at the bottom of each slide listed Chief Emeka and his cousin as the sole architects of the vision. NECA's name was nowhere to be found. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she realized the depth of the erasure. She reached into her bag to check her work email on her phone, hoping it was just a technical error. A red notification popped up on her screen. "Access denied. Account disabled." She looked up at Chief, who was now shaking hands with the governor, looking as though he didn't even know she existed. Before NECA could even process the humiliation of the screen, a stern-faced woman from the Human Resources Department tapped her on the shoulder. "Please follow me," the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. NECA was led into a small, windowless side room where two security guards stood by the door. On the table sat a formal letter. "You are being terminated effective immediately," the HR manager stated. "Chief Emeka has provided evidence of data theft. He claims you have been trying to extort recognition for work that belongs to the senior partners." NECA gasped, her voice caught in her throat. "That is a lie. I wrote those documents." The manager sighed, pushing a folder toward her. "The metadata shows the files were created and edited solely by Chief and his associates. You are also accused of having ambition beyond your rank, which has created a toxic environment." NECA realized then that the forged timestamps Chief had created were now being used as the murder weapon. She was told that she would be blacklisted in the city's corporate circle. No one would hire a thief who tried to bite the hand that fed her. She was escorted to the back exit like a common criminal. The news of Neka's disgrace traveled faster than a bushfire in the dry season. Within hours, the city's gossip blogs were screaming with headlines about the ambitious assistant who tried to steal a merger. People who had once smiled at her in the corridors now crossed the street to avoid her. Even more painful was the news reaching her village. A distant cousin called her mother, repeating the lies he had read online. "Your daughter has brought shame to our name," the village elders whispered at the marketplace. "She went to the city and forgot the humility we taught her." Neka sat in her small apartment, the silence echoing around her. She had no job, no access to her professional files, and her reputation was in tatters. She thought of her mother's words about loyalty and felt a bitter taste in her mouth. Loyalty had not been her wealth. It had been her blindfold. With a heavy heart and a small suitcase, she boarded a night bus back to the village. She didn't say goodbye to anyone. She returned to the river in silence, watching the water flow past, wondering if the truth would ever find its way to the surface. While Neka sat by the river in the village, Chief Emeka reached the pinnacle of his worldly success. 2 months after the merger, he was nominated for the National Entrepreneur of the Year award. The ceremony was a glittering affair, attended by the highest officials in the land. When his name was called, the applause was deafening. Chief walked onto the stage, adjusted his silk agbada, and held the golden trophy high above his head. "I dedicate this award to the 2 pillars of my life, hard work and absolute loyalty," he declared into the microphone, his voice booming with false sincerity. He looked out into the crowd of influencers and journalists, relishing the flash of the cameras. He felt invincible. He had successfully buried the only person who knew the truth, and the world was rewarding him for it. However, in the third row, sitting quietly with a glass of water, was Mr. Sterling. The investor watched the display with a piercing, unblinking gaze. He remembered the young woman who had saved the pitch in the dark office years ago. He noticed that since her departure, the company's reports had become flashy but hollow. He sensed a lie in the air. With the merger money flowing in, Chief Emeka began to live like a king who feared no tomorrow. He bought a fleet of luxury cars and moved into a mansion so large it had its own elevator. He spent his days hosting lavish parties and his nights counting his projected profits. But success had turned his heart into a stone. He became arrogant and dismissive, firing any employee who dared to ask a question or point out a mistake. "I am the visionary," he would scream at board meetings, slamming his fist on the table. "I built this empire from nothing. You are all replaceable." He replaced experienced staff with yes men. These clauses one by one. They were taking shortcuts to show quick profits, unaware that they were walking into a legal minefield. A penalty clause countdown, hidden deep within the fine print of the 300-page contract, began to tick. If certain targets were not met by the third quarter, the international investors had the right to seize control of the board. Chief Emeka was too busy picking out the leather interior for his newest private jet to notice the warning lights flashing on the company's internal dashboard. He thought he had stolen her work, but he hadn't understood it. He had stolen a complex machine and was now pressing all the wrong buttons, thinking they were for show. The first crack in the empire appeared when the international investors requested an emergency explanation for the missed quarterly targets. The delays in the infrastructure project were becoming impossible to ignore. Chief Emeka, caught off guard during a conference call, panicked. Instead of taking responsibility, he did what he always did. He shifted the blame. "These are junior staff errors," he told Mr. Sterling over the video link. "The girl I fired months ago, she left the files in a mess. We are still cleaning up her sabotage." But the investors were not fools. They had been tracking the metadata and the project flow. After the call, several of the original internal staff members, tired of Chief's tyranny, secretly contacted Mr. Sterling's team. They sent anonymous tips about the night of the blackout and the money Neka had provided. Mr. Sterling sat in his London office, looking at the evidence. He turned to his assistant and asked a question that would change everything. Where is the young woman who did the original pitch? The one with the eyes that didn't blink? Find her. We need the truth, not these excuses. Unaware of the storm gathering over his head, Chief Emeka sat for a high-profile television interview. He wanted to cement his image as a self-made titan. The journalist asked him about his former assistant, Nneka, mentioning the rumors that she had played a significant role in his success. Chief laughed, a loud, mocking sound that echoed through the studio. Nneka? She was a charity case, he said, leaning back confidently. She misunderstood her importance. Some people are born to lead, and others are born to carry the bags of leaders. She didn't have the intellect for this level of business. She was just a village girl who got lucky for a moment. The interview went viral within minutes, but not for the reasons Chief expected. The public, especially the younger generation, sensed his staggering arrogance. The village girl comment struck a nerve with millions who had struggled to rise from humble beginnings. While the internet buzzed with clips of his mockery, an anonymous email was sent to the country's leading investigative journalists. It contained a PDF of the original proposal Nneka had written, with timestamps that proved it existed long before Chief's masterpiece. The digital world began to turn against Chief Emeka with the speed of a landslide. Screenshots of the original authored documents began to circulate on social media, side by side with the versions Chief had presented at the ceremony. Tech-savvy investigators pointed out the metadata timestamps. They showed that the core strategies had been created on Nneka's personal laptop 2 years prior, while Chief was still struggling to pay his rent. The narrative began to shift from ambitious assistant to the great corporate theft. Journalists began to haunt the company's headquarters, asking uncomfortable questions about forged signatures and forged timestamps. Chief tried to release a statement calling it fake news, but the evidence was too consistent. In the village, Nneka's mother watched the news on a neighbor's small television. She saw her daughter's name being cleared in the scrolling text at the bottom of the screen. She didn't say a word. She just went to the river and offered a prayer of thanks. The truth was like a seed buried deep in the earth. It might take time, but it would always find the sun. The pressure reached a breaking point when Mr. Sterling flew into the country and demanded an emergency board meeting. He didn't ask, he commanded. He sent a formal summons to every board member, and one special invitation was sent via a private courier to a small house by the Ethiop River. When the courier arrived, Nneka was sitting on the porch, shelling groundnuts. She looked at the gold-embossed envelope and felt a strange calm. She had been expecting this. The invitation was not a request for a job. It was a summons to a reckoning. "They want me to go back," she told her mother that evening. Mama Ifani looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with a fierce pride. "You go," the old woman said, "not for the money and not for the title. You go so that the river of your life can flow straight again. Let them see the woman they tried to drown." Nneka packed her suitcase once more, but this time, her head was held high. She wasn't a victim returning to a crime scene. She was a witness returning to the truth. The day of the emergency board meeting was gray and rainy, much like the day Nneka had been escorted out by security. As she walked toward the massive glass doors of the headquarters, she felt the eyes of the staff on her. The whispers filled the hall, but they were different now. They weren't whispers of mockery. They were whispers of awe. As she reached the conference room, something extraordinary happened. Several senior employees, the ones who had worked with her during the dark days, stood up as she entered the room. It was a silent act of defiance against Chief Emeka, who was sitting at the head of the table, his face pale and sweating. Mr. Sterling sat at the opposite end, his face like carved granite. "Welcome, Miss Nneka," Mr. Sterling said, gesturing to a seat beside him. "We have been reviewing some interesting digital footprints. We would like to hear your version of how this company was actually built." Chief Emeka tried to object, his voice cracking. "This is an outrage. She is a disgraced former employee." Mr. Sterling ignored him entirely. "The evidence presentation will begin now." An IT specialist from an independent forensic firm stepped forward and opened a laptop. He projected his screen onto the wall, showing the back end of the company's server. "We have confirmed document tampering," the specialist announced. "We found the original files in the shadow folders. They were created by user NECA_V over a period of 18 months. We also found the logs showing when Chief Emeka accessed them to change the author names." The room went deathly silent. Then, the door opened, and Chief's cousin walked in, looking broken. He had been promised a life of luxury, but the threat of prison had loosened his tongue. "I confess," the cousin whispered, refusing to look at Chief. "I was told to replace her name. I didn't write a single word of the merger. Chief told me it was the only way to protect the image of the company." Chief Emeka slumped in his chair, his hands shaking. He looked around the room and saw not a single friendly face. Even his most loyal yes-men were looking at their feet, realizing the ship was sinking. Mr. Sterling stood up, his presence filling the room with a cold authority. He looked directly at the board members. "I invested in this company because of a pitch I heard 2 years ago," he said. "I didn't invest in a man in a silk agbada. I invested in the integrity and vision of the woman who spoke that day. I included a key person integrity clause in the contract for this very reason." He turned to Chief Emeka. "You violated that clause the moment you forged those documents. Under the terms of our merger, the investors have the right to remove leadership in the event of proven ethical breach." The board members, realizing their own investments were at stake, didn't hesitate. They had seen the metadata. They had heard the confession. One by one, they raised their hands. "The clause is activated," the chairman announced. "Chief Emeka, you are hereby stripped of your title and your shares. You have 1 hour to clear your desk." NECA watched the man who had tried to destroy her. He looked small now, stripped of the borrowed robes of her hard work. The reckoning was not confined to the boardroom. Mr. Sterling insisted that the findings be announced publicly, in the same banquet hall where NECA had been humiliated. The cameras flashed again, but this time the story was different. Mr. Sterling stood at the podium and told the world the truth. He spoke of the village girl who had saved a company with her own savings, and the boss who had tried to steal her soul. The National Entrepreneur Award Committee stepped forward and formally revoked Chief Emeka's title, announcing that a new investigation into financial fraud was being launched by the authorities. The crowd, the same elite crowd that had watched her be escorted out, now stood and cheered for NECA. She stood on the stage, looking out at the lights, but she didn't feel the need to boast. She felt a deep, quiet sense of vindication. Emotional justice was not a loud explosion. It was the steady return of the tide. Law enforcement officers were already waiting at the back of the hall to take Chief Emeka in for questioning regarding the forged legal documents. The fall of Chief Emeka was as rapid as his rise. Without his title and the company's resources, his creditors descended like vultures. His luxury cars were towed away, and his mansion was put up for auction to pay back the investors he had misled. His social media, once full of boastful videos, went silent as his friends vanished overnight. The sponsors who had lined up to support him withdrew their contracts, citing the reputational risk. He became a ghost in the city he once thought he owned. He spent his days in a small rented room, staring at the walls, listening to the news of NECA's success. He realized too late that he hadn't just lost a business, he had lost his honor. He sent a desperate, handwritten note to NECA, requesting a private meeting. He claimed he wanted to explain everything. NECA agreed to meet him one last time, not out of weakness, but because she wanted to see the face of the man who had taught her the most painful lesson of her life. They met in a quiet corner of a park, far from the flashing lights of the city. Chief Emeka looked aged, his face lined with a stress that no expensive scotch could dull. He didn't wait for her to speak. He began to weep, claiming that the pressure of the city had changed him. "I was afraid, NECA," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw how brilliant you were, and I felt so small. I thought if I took your credit, I could finally be the man everyone thought I was. I was jealous of your light because I was living in the dark." He begged for her forgiveness, asking her to use her new influence to stop the criminal investigations. "We were a team once," he pleaded. "Think of all we built together." Neka looked at him and saw a man who still didn't understand. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he had been caught. He was still trying to use their history to save himself from the consequences of his choices. She took a deep breath, her voice steady and clear. "I have a condition," she said. "My condition is simple," Neka told him, her eyes fixed on his. "You say you are sorry for the pressure and the fear, but the world still thinks I was the thief. You must go live on national television and confess the truth yourself. You must tell them exactly how you forged the timestamps, how you stole the surgery money, and how you lied to the board. You must return the honor you stole in the same way you took it, publicly." Chief Emeka gasped. A public confession would mean the end of any hope of a comeback. It would be a total social death. But he looked at Neka and saw the strength of the river in her eyes. He knew he had no choice. 2 days later, he appeared on a live broadcast. He spoke for 30 minutes, his voice shaking as he detailed every betrayal. The nation watched in stunned silence as the Titan admitted he was a fraud. When he finished, the interviewer asked Neka for her response. The crowd waited, breathlessly, to see if she would strike him down or offer him a hand. Neka did neither. She didn't seek to destroy him further, nor did she pretend the wounds weren't real. Instead, she accepted the investor's offer to lead the entire project as the new CEO. Her first act was to restructure the company, building in protections for every employee to ensure that no one's work could ever be stolen again. She created a transparency board, where even the lowest-ranking intern could see the progress of their ideas. When she walked into the office on her first day as head of the firm, the staff didn't just stand. They cheered until the walls shook. She was their redemption, the proof that integrity could win in a world of greed. But after the celebrations were over, Neka did something no one expected. She took a week off and returned to the river village. She didn't arrive in a convoy of luxury cars. She arrived in a simple car, wearing a simple wrapper, carrying a bag of gifts for the children of the village. She went straight to her mother's house and sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the Ethiop River. The river flowed as it always had, indifferent to the rise and fall of men. Standing by the water that had raised her, Neka reflected on her journey. She realized that loyalty is indeed a strength, but it is a weapon that must be guided by the shield of wisdom. Chief Emeka faced years of legal battles and a life of social isolation, a prisoner of his own greed. Neka used her new wealth to build scholarships for girls from humble backgrounds, ensuring that other village girls would have the tools to protect their own brilliance. She built a clinic in the village, named after her mother, so that no one would ever have to choose between their savings and a loved one's sight. As the stars began to appear in the sky, she thought of Chief Emeka's last plea for forgiveness. She had moved on, but she would never forget. The river knows that some paths can never be retraced. If a man truly changes, the universe will provide his path, but it doesn't have to be the same path as hers. The final question remained in the air like the scent of rain. If he one day truly changes, should she forgive him? If you felt this story, subscribe, because the next one will be even deeper.